Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining our session today. Diana Harvey, who's one of our pre-sales solution engineers, and myself, Ben Bolte, who the director of sales. We're going to go through some topics here about Business Central and migrating from your legacy solutions of either SL or GP. And really, what our goal today is to talk about how we can help accelerate that implementation, um, help you get some better utilization of the new system with some of our methodologies and how we'll help you guys with migrations. Spend some time talking about strategies to lower the risk of these migrations and getting the benefits of BC quicker. And then last but not least, really highlight some of the tools that are available today because stuff has changed dramatically over the last couple of years that we've talked about doing these migrations, and the availability of tools has really improved over that time period. So one of the first things I really like to think about is things to consider when you're going through a migration like this. And, you know, technology has changed dramatically, but also our companies have. If you think about when you implemented the current ERP solution, it probably was 5, 10, or maybe 15 or 20 years ago. And as a company, your business has changed dramatically. And more than likely, with COVID and other things going on, you might want to be thinking about, hey, what's changed our business from when we started or when we started this application to where we are today? And if you're like a lot of our customers, they've really changed. They might have started out as a mom and pop that worked directly with clients locally, and now they're working with multi-state or multi-country type implementations with an e-commerce presence, and it's not people walking off the street anymore. So you know everybody's really gone through some changes on what their requirements are. And if your company is one of those, you might want to think about doing a fresh implementation and really looking back and going, hey, what are our requirements for a business today? And where are we trying to go as a company? Versus migrating and keeping what you have and that type of same process and procedures that you have today and moving it into Business Central. The other thing to think about is, what's changed from a company structure perspective. We see a lot of mergers and acquisitions where we've brought companies together that maybe in the past you just did distribution, but maybe you bought one of your key manufacturing companies and your needs have really changed over the, the lifespan of your ERP product you have today. So I really suggest spending a little time thinking about what's changed as your business has evolved and what we can do to make sure that we're there for you with an implementation that's going to work for you moving forward, not just today. The second piece I really like to talk about and spend some time on is around integrations. Most people grew up on a system and then jumped to the Great Plains or the SL system they have today with a need for integrations with other platforms. Maybe you have a direct billing system, or maybe it's an e-commerce platform. Maybe it's time entry, those type of things. And we see a lot of these integrations that we have to deal with your new system, whether it's Business Central or anything else. But when we're thinking about it from a Business Central perspective, a lot of times we've added features to the base product that weren't there historically. Emails for invoices and stuff like that. These are things that we commonly see people had in the past as add-ons or PDF type conversion tools that today are base product. They don't need to be there. But there's still going to be maybe website integrations and those type of things that we need to look at and think about how is that going to be addressed as we migrate forward. So really taking some time with your team, spend identifying what those integration paths are that you have today and what they're accomplishing, and if they're still needed. We see things that are integrated with fax systems in the past that have been replaced, but they're still there and still that legacy technology hurdle, so to speak, that we have to remove as we migrate into a new system. So things like that to think about. The third area that I really like to talk about is third-party ISVs. And if you think about from an ISV perspective, there's a lot of add-ons that we've implemented into systems in the past, whether it's on GP or SL. Many of those add-on companies have built an add-on now for Business Central so that you can continue to use them if you need to moving forward. In some cases, they may be out of business. They might not have built a product for Business Central, but really instead of just identifying who made the product or what that add-on is, what is its function, is that truly still needed? If we go back to the email solution, like I mentioned earlier, it's one we typically see that was very common in the past. Now it's base product. I mean, we can strip some of that stuff out and really not only simplify your implementation, but make it easier for upgrades moving forward and save that cost to those third parties. Diana's going to spend a little time later in our presentation today, and she's going to show you a product or a website that Microsoft has created called AppSource, which is a really great tool to leverage to look those companies up, see what they have today, see what's available out there, and even more importantly, in some cases, if they're not there, who else has a product that can address these needs? There's this app marketplace is growing on a daily basis. We continue to see stuff that gets added that's needed, and we're getting to see more and more duplicate solutions, which is great for the end users like yourselves. So you can pick a best of breed, not just have to pick the one that exists. So great things coming in that space. We're going to talk about historical needs here a little bit in another slide, but just lightly hitting on this right now. As a company, what are your historical needs? When we think about that, what I'm saying is how detailed of transaction levels do you need? Usually we bring over starting balances, some GL summary record level, but really how deep you need beyond that really varies by customers' needs, and maybe you have requirements from a data compliance perspective to be able to go back so many years, and everyone's needs here are slightly different, and making sure that we address those up front and understanding what those are, and then tying that into reporting. Sometimes we can build a reporting solution that'll bridge the two solutions, and sometimes it's just a matter of figuring out from reporting needs, what are you doing today from a reporting perspective that we're going to need to replicate moving forward. Your standard invoice type stuff, purchase orders, those are light mods that we're going to do to those to make them customized for your company. But think about it more from a corporate performance management perspective. What reports do you need outside of your basic income statements and balance sheets that really help you from an operational perspective and also from a financials perspective when you think about reporting? On the legacy solutions, a lot of customers are using SQL reporting services or management reporter. Those tools aren't going to be available when you move to a cloud SaaS-based application. There's going to be some new requirements around that. So really understanding what those needs are, what those reports are, and then we can work with you guys to figure out how to move that over to a newer solution, whether it's Cosmos, Jet Reports, Solver, or another solution that we have with Azure. I mean, there's lots of options there. And last but not least is Power BI, which you might be using already, and figuring out how we're going to map those over into the new solution. Another thing that I always like to remind people to think about is from a licensing perspective and the ramifications of those changes. So many of our clients are taking advantage of the Bridge to the Cloud offer, which has been a great promo for Microsoft to really allow you to have access to both Business Central and your traditional legacy on-premise licensing. But also one of the things to keep in mind when we go through that transition is you're going to go from what was a historical concurrent-based user license over to a named user license scenario. When you make that switch, you're going to add additional users probably from a license perspective than what you historically had. If you have the Bridge to the Cloud offer, Microsoft gives you basically access to some additional users, so it really shouldn't change it from a cost perspective, but things that you got to think about how that's going to affect you and who really needs access to the system. Also, if you're using Microsoft 365 and Teams like we do here at Velosio, Microsoft recently made some changes that team members can get access to a lot of stuff from a read-only perspective without even a license to the application. Some really neat stuff there. And then, obviously with the Teams integration with Business Central, you can share some data and stuff, which is really cool. Just things to think about how that ties into your other applications. And then, one of the things I think is just really important when we think about your the end users in your company is setting expectations and having a proper training plan in place. Depending on what legacy solution you're coming from, this is going to be a big change in how the user works. If you're coming from SL or GP, there's some fundamental differences in how Business Central handles some of these things. Your basic accounting functions really aren't changed, but the UI is much different. And having the ability to access this from anywhere on any device, some of the stuff is just foreign to how we've worked in the past with legacy on-premise solutions. So you're going to gain some bells and whistles there, so to speak, to use. You're going to be able to get it from other places, but making sure that you set up the time and training for your users so that they know what they can and can't do and where they can and can't do it. And then, make sure they understand the new processes. And if you're doing a fresh implementation versus a migration type of an approach, that implementation or how you process stuff internally is going to change dramatically. And we want to make sure that they understand, hey, here's how we used to do it, and this is the new process and what we're trying to accomplish with the ERP system. And just because it's different doesn't always mean it's better, so to speak. So, the one thing I always remind people of is when you put in a new system, most times somebody's job is going to get a lot easier. Sometimes somebody's job gets more difficult because there's additional steps that might fall on their plate. And sometimes you got to shift responsibilities slightly. So, keep an open mind to that. Somebody typically gets more work on their plate when we put in a new system. And it's not that it's more work for everybody, but sometimes just where the work gets shifted a little bit when you set up different roles and permissions in the system, and making sure you think that through and making sure that I use the term fair for everyone at the end, so somebody doesn't feel like they got the short end, so to speak. So just things to think about from that perspective. Jumping to the next slide, I want to dive a little bit more into the historical record side of things. So when we think about historical records, to me, there's really three different ways we achieve what our clients typically are looking for in these things. So one being an archive system, second being a data lake, and we typically use Azure to build out a data lake to access this stuff. And third is a data warehouse. And we do that sometimes with Azure. We do it with or Azure SQL. Sometimes we're using Solver's data warehouses. I mean, we have different options and different tool sets depending on specifically what your needs are and what reporting solution you're coming off historically. If you're a Solver customer and your data is in there ready, great. Let's bridge it and connect it to Business Central and marry that data up so you can do that reporting. But really what I wanted to point out here is there's two things. So one, if you need to get down to the gory level and print every report, every transaction, every invoice, purchase order, whatever, having access to your old system from an archive perspective is probably the best method for you. We can do that. We can spin up in a small environment in Azure so you have access to it. There's a lot of options there, but something to think about. If you're looking at just purely from a reporting perspective, well, then some of these other options might be better for you. We have some tools that we use with Azure Data Lakes that you can get some of this data from right within Business Central with some third-party add-ons. And of course, Power BI, you can visualize the data you want to get to and get paginated reports and all of that fun stuff. And again, the same with data warehouses. It's really understanding what you're trying to accomplish, how many data sources there are, and making sure that we present that data in a way that gets you what you need from a historical perspective, but also allows you to start doing some of that forecasting stuff that you'd expect to be able to have when you had that historical data and knowing what your current data requirements are. And the last thing I wanted to hit on here before I transition over to Diana is really thinking about assessments. And we'll talk a little about this a little bit further, but there's two things to think about as a company when you're doing these transitions between systems. There's the product side of the assessment. Hey, I need to do X. I did it in the old system this way, and I need to do it a different way in the new system. But there's also the process side of things. And I really like to make sure we separate those two when we're thinking this through. If you think back earlier in the conversation today, we were talking about, what's changed in your company since you implemented. I see companies often where they start out as a distribution company, they start doing some manufacturing or maybe some minor kitting or assemblies. Next thing you know, they're doing full-on manufacturing, but they never implemented manufacturing system, and then they wonder why they don't have forecasting and availability and some of the stuff, the work in process that you'd expect. If that's you, like, then maybe a reimplementation is the right thing, and then let's look at it from a full process assessment perspective. If the company's needs really haven't changed, then it's really, we're swapping products, and it's a product assessment about, hey, does it still meet our needs when we move from a legacy to Business Central perspective? Now, historically, when we think about this from a product perspective, SL and GP had kind of their niches, and what was the legacy product for Business Central was NAV or Navision. They all kind of had their own little spots and strengths and weaknesses. Microsoft's done a great job of bridging some of that, so Business Central can be that overall solution to replace all three. And where was some shortcomings, there's some add-ons. We built Progressus to help with the SL clients to get that additional functionality from a project billing perspective and project accounting that they needed that weren't there. And the same's been done with other areas. So if you evaluated the systems in the past and you thought, hey, well, there's a reason we picked GP over NAV or what's become BC, and like it might not be a fit, it's time to rethink that and really look closer at that. So just want to remind people that, because I see that come up every once in a while in conversations that, we went down this path at one point for a reason, and things have changed. So we want to remember that, keep that in mind as we work through that. So the next thing I want to hit on here, and this is a tool that Microsoft developed, and we don't have one of these currently from an SL perspective, but we do have what we call the Cloud Migration Assessment tool for GP for Microsoft. And this tool I find is really handy for a couple things. One, we can get a really good survey of what is being used in the system today, what modules are being used, how many companies are being used, what ISVs are being used. Now, none of this is going to tell me what I necessarily need in my new system, but it does help trigger ideas of, oh my, we did this or we added this. Because what I find is there's a lot of customers that have been on a solution for 10, 15 years or more. They don't even remember the mods they've done or the ISVs they've added along the way. This helps trigger some of those things. It also gives us a great way to look at the data and how it resides today, so we can figure out what might need to be done to help with the migration moving forward. So in the next couple of slides we're going to go through, we're going to show you some of the things that the tool does. And if you look at the left side of the slides, so to speak, it breaks this out into categories. So you can look at issues by a category, by company. So in this particular case, this assessment had 20 some companies in. Each company is highlighted across the top, and then there's various issues throughout that on the left-hand side. And you could drill into any of the companies that are the details that are highlighted in blue. When you drill into that, it's going to tell us, hey, what's wrong with that particular company, with that particular data set, and it gives us some tips and ideas of how to go about and fix that. So in this particular example, there are some issues with posting groups that weren't set up correctly. So it gives us a great opportunity to go back in, lets us know exactly what posting group it is that's not set up right. There's some SQL scripts here you can run to help fix it. So it really helps us clean up the data, because when you move stuff over, the old garbage in, garbage out kind of concept, this really gives you an opportunity to help clean some of that stuff up and make that transition easier. The ounce prevention is huge when we're doing these migrations to really help that transition of data, make sure that transition is smoother. If we go to the next slide here, Diana, we can oops, can we go back just one? Or I guess it's two back for me, please.
Sorry.
Oh, no problem. So the other things that it'll give us is some migration risk section. I thought we had a slide for that. I guess we don't today. But the migration risk is going to highlight things like, hey, we might not be up on the current version of SQL that we need to be. Maybe there's some part that doesn't transition and we need to address it. And then in the additional companies or additional products section, excuse me, that section really gives you a great opportunity to look at what ISVs are installed, what versions they are, and really refresh your head, so to speak, on what you've done to the system, which, like I said, it helps you understand what we had to think about when we're going through the migrations, and just making sure that we got as much cleaned up as we can and that we don't miss things. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Diana to kind of go through some of these tools a little bit further.
All righty, thank you. So the two tools that I'm going to talk about today are the Dynamics GP Intelligence Cloud and the SL Intelligence Cloud. So these are two options that are available in the marketplace. So the first thing I am going to also bring up is talking a little bit about where do I find those tools. So Extension Marketplace is the starting point. And then that's just going to open up, as we've mentioned a couple times, to the migration options that are available. If I type in for Intelligent Cloud, then it's going to bring up the GP and the SL options. And it does allow you to, if I click on it, to just get a little bit more information about it and then also some screenshots on it. As Ben had mentioned, the app source is a great option for finding many pieces of information in the system or any new add-ons. So a couple things also related to this that we're not going to spend time going into on the products, but it is good to know that these exist, as we do have clients that acquire other companies, and those companies might be on QuickBooks. So these are just other ones that have been done before related to the QuickBooks was the first one that Microsoft actually made a tool for. There are some for advanced projects and some other ones that have been out there in the past. So just kind of want to, there's also a tool out there for importing using Excel. So if we really not have an option for the integration tool, then that would be something that you could take a look at. So if I come back over here, so like I said, we're going to spend a little bit of time on the GP and a little bit of time on the SL product. And so if I look at the GP first here, then there is, I'm going to state, you do not want to do this alone and you want to have our assistance. So the tool is there, but just be aware that you're going to have a little bit of consulting time. Not only are you downloading the product, but you're connecting it with your existing system. So we do want to make sure that you're getting what you want and you're not, as Ben said earlier, pulling in a bunch of garbage that really isn't the pieces of information that you need. So we're kind of looking at this at a high level from the GP and the SL side of it. So first off, on the GP side, once you have installed that add-on, you have connected and gone through a little bit of a setup screen. This is just an example of some of the setup screens that are out there. So you'll see that it has the module areas. So you're looking at the banking, the payables, receivable, open purchase orders, and inventory. So down here is some examples of master records. So do I want the GL, the bank, receivables, payables, and inventory? And it also has some options for the inactive records. So these are ones you're just going to go through and you're going to select them. And then that's going to work through to get the data into the system. All right. And obviously, if you're dealing with dimensional values, which is a Business Central feature, then you're going to work with a consultant to understand setting up the dimensions prior to some of the data coming in. So you have a little bit of a matching option. I go to my next screen here. So this is
Diana,
just
I'm just going to interrupt for just one
yep,
second.
go ahead.
So when we talk about dimensions, just so everyone's kind of clear, if you think about in SL and GP, you kind of had segmented accounts. Dimensions is a way of segmenting those accounts differently. So it's one of those fundamental things from a migration perspective we're going to want to look at and make sure we analyze and set up correctly. But that's really going to leverage your reporting solutions long term to make sure that you can slice and dice the data in any way, shape, and form that you want down the road. So that's one of those areas from a consulting perspective we're going to really want to spend some time on to make sure we understand what your long-term goals are and make sure that it's aligned with what you're trying to do from a reporting perspective.
And super important for bringing in your historical data, because it's the one area that does adjust your historical data to match up with your future data. So that is key, along with, obviously chart of account number, things like that. But that's really important, is the dimensional side. So this is just an example on the GP side. Once again, once you bring in the data. So I'm obviously, skipping over a bunch of steps here where you're actually bringing it in. We're assuming everything's coming in wonderful and you're not having any errors, no problem. You've already done that GP assessment that Ben talked about. So we know the data is good. It's just going to come in. So you do have some options under, like in the ledger entries here. that I have GP, snapshot, detail by account. So if we go ahead to the next screen, so this is historic general journal lines. So once again, it's related to GP data. It's going to give me the GP account, which is not referencing the same account in Business Central because I don't have all the dashes in the segments that are in the transaction here. But it does give me my originating document number. It does tell me the type, the current. It's really trying to I go to the next screen here. So this is an example of one of the transactions that I can then drill into. If I drill into it, it does tell me the invoice, my date information, once again, my amounts, my tax. So this is very much, going to give my ship to, but it's all in a sense of read-only this information. I can go down and I can also see the invoice document. Then this is an option for bringing in the date of it. And it's just showing you some examples of pulling that in. The next one I wanted to talk about is just migrating data from SL to Business Central. So this one, similar to the GP, as in the case of the GP, the wizard only covers chart of accounts, master records for the customer, master record for the vendors, receivables and payables. All right, inventory counts, some historical data, and the checkbook master data. Okay, you really want to make sure that as you're pulling it in and you're looking at it, that you're understanding the data that comes in. And checking the information out. So one of the things is that you want to release and post all unreleased batches, repair any suspended batches. You're going to do integrity checks. You want to run reports, make sure the balances and everything are okay. Are there future period balances? So these are just ones that you probably were doing it when you were doing an upgrade in SL, that you're going to do the same thing because you want to, once again, look at and have good data and not have things error out on you. This screen's important if you're looking to, within your system, say, well, what can I run in my system to know that everything is okay? Okay, so these are ones that we can provide for you that just gives you a basic list of looking in the different areas of the general ledger, the accounts payable, and the accounts receivable. And I would also suggest that there's going to be some inventory reports that you can also run. So on the next one, this once again just shows you once you're inside Business Central and you've done the setup, you've connected to your system, you're doing, in a sense, a SQL link to that database. You want to make sure, obviously, you're going to do checks on permissions, checks on security. How many companies are we looking at? How many environments are we looking at? In the SL situation, you could have multiple environments along with having the multiple companies. So there's many steps you're going to get to before this. If we actually put it in a slide, there's probably 40 slides before you're going to get to this part. All right. So this part just has it through the migration, data migration pieces. And this is where it shows you the QuickBooks I talked about, that you also can do the SL. It once again brings up the main records of what are you looking to choose to migrate that data over. All right, so the next one over, this is once it comes in, it just goes into a table of information. So you'll notice this looks a little bit different than the GP one because that's going into a GP historical data. This one's going into an SL historical data. So it brings over and it tells me the company that it's involved, the table name that's involved. So it's pretty logical: AP transaction, AR transaction, a batch historical one. What are my custom tables? How many records are in it? The sizes and so forth. So this is a very summarized look at that information. If I go to the next one here, this one is in more detail. It has my account number, it has an apply date, a batch number, and it would bring in the amounts and so forth, the date. This is a little bit older data. So it's showing you the detail of that information. And then kind of the last slide to talk about this area of it is very important pieces to understand when doing the migration from GP or SL, or as I said, QuickBooks, in case you're buying the companies that are on QuickBooks, is the data is visible in the production environment. All right, you're seeing the data, but you're not always able to do something with the data within Business Central. And that's the important part on number 2. It's not available for native Business Central reports. So if you're pulling an older financial, an older trial balance, you're trying to come up with a aged accounts receivable report from a year ago, you're not going to get that information within the Business Central product. All right, the data is there so that you can see it, you can have it, but you really are going to have to go to step number 3, which is the data can be used in reporting tools. So such as the Cosmo, Solver, Jet, and so forth, is you're going to have to look at those custom tables that have the data in it, and then the data that it's within the Business Central product. Now, where you might have an issue with that also is the fact that just like it would sit in GP or sit in SL, is you have your account number dash sub account or segment. And in our environment, we're going to have the true GL account number and a dimensional value. So there's going to be a little bit of a difference there, but you would have that no matter how you handle that, whether you kept it in your existing system and you just archived your GSL system and you pulled reports off of it, you'd also have that same issue. It cannot be used with older versions of GP and SL. And that's really important because we have many clients. I'm not sure if it's 2015 where we're kind of discussing that. We think they've actually bumped it to a more current version than that. And I know on the SL, it needs to be 2018. So it's obviously not available for everybody. And that's where we'd have to go with the other options that Ben had talked about. One of the things that they both had said, but they don't necessarily tell you which records they're talking about, is don't assume all data records will come over. All right. So I'm going to use an example. If you were doing this to Business Central, you can't assume that change logs are going to come over or user permissions are going to come over, things like that you might store in a table and go, well, I really need to know that for future. You cannot assume that. Not fixed assets, maybe. That's something that, it's not on our master list of something that might be able to come over. Another option that you have is that Business Central has what we call configuration package tools that actually allow you to create templates for your master records. So if you can get the master records out of your existing system, that's what we're going to use to create them within our system. So some of these are, in a sense, just taking the replacement of a configuration package. If you're bringing in the master records for customers and vendors, then that's really what we're looking to do. One of the options that appeared to be available for both the GP and the SL migration is the ability to somewhat pull out inactive vendors or inactive customers, where it's bringing very much the current ones that are out there, not all ones that just have an open entry. So those are great options to consider. One of the other things that it doesn't do for the GPSL that our configuration or migration tools will do is we'll bring over balances for the vendor 1099. So even if you don't have an open balance for that vendor, then we would still bring over those entries to allow you to do 1099s in the system if you do a mid-year changeover. But once again, I'm just going to wrap up with my feeling on it is it's an option that's out there. You would need to work with a consultant to do it. When I went through some of the instructions and processes, I'm like, you need a GP person talking with an SL or a GP person talking with a GP person to make sure that the two systems talk and that you get the information that you're looking for. And then you would carefully want to go through that data. So it's an option. It's not a push of a button and it's going to do it for you. Okay. Did you have any additional comments, Ben?
Yeah, I was just going to add to that. So I think that's a great observation, Diana. The one thing I would remind everyone is these migrations are not simple. They're really complex. It's the lifeblood of your business, and our goal today is really not to scare anyone from making the change, because I think they're great changes and necessary to do, but also recognize the complexity that's involved and the value of leaning on a partner like us who's got the skills on both sides of the team, whether it's the legacy solution or the modern solution that Business Central that you're going to, and really bridging that gap from a knowledge perspective and being able to bring those systems over and make sure that you have everything you need from your old one, whether you do an archive system or we migrate some of that data, understanding that. And then most importantly, making sure we're setting you up for the future where you want to be. You know, I can't say it enough, the concern that we have about, you know, so many times we see customers want to buy a new system, and then when we go to implement, the tendency is, hey, I want it to look just like this is the way my old system is. And most of us, if we asked, we'd say, hey, do you have things you'd like to change about your current system? They could rattle off a whole list of them. Well, this is your time. Like this is the perfect time to look at those things and go, hey, this is how we do it today, but what can we do better? So, you know, when we talk about re-implementing or migrating, really think that through. How's your company changed? Does everything work great today? If you could do it different, what would you do different? You know, think outside the box. And, you know, Lee on our team, Diana's in the pre-sales team, and we have others on our team, you know, ask those questions. Hey, this is what we do today. Is there a better way to do it? Or should we be thinking about things differently? You know, the other thing I'll add is, you know, a lot of customers have customizations in their systems. And when everybody talks about, hey, I want to go to a system that doesn't have all these. That's great. And we all would love to get there too, where everyone has a stock system. But the reality is customizations are usually there because it's something different. And you know, I always challenge customers, if we're doing it because we're doing it, it's probably not a great idea. If you're doing a customization because that's your special sauce, what makes your business unique or special or your competitive advantage, by all means, let's make those customizations. Let's make your company better. Let's make those integrations better. Let's simplify things for you. But let's not do customizations just because, hey, I wish this was over just a little bit. Does that really, is there a business value or an ROI there? You know, think those things through, and I think you'll really find that some of that stuff you might have done in the past you don't need. Maybe it was somebody's personal whatever, like they wanted something, but what's really needed, what's gonna accelerate your business, what's gonna allow you guys to do something that your competitors can't. Those are the areas that I really would stress implementing it and you know, spending the time customizing, doing what you need to do. And then last but not least, you know, Diana, we talk about this all the time when we talk about reports. Over time, customers have built more and more and more reports. How many of them are actually being used? Like what reports do you need? And if you ask and survey your team, what ones are you actually running? You're probably going to find there's 1 out of 10 or so that you actually need. And those are the ones we should focus on. And then ask what else you would need to do a better job in your business today. How else you could get more out of the data if you had a better set of reports. So think those things through as you go through the process. And remember, you know, we're here at Velosio to help you guys through this. This is a partnership opportunity where we can really help you guys grow your business, do what we're best at, leverage our experience from other customers to help you through these migrations and really get you to a SaaS solution that's going to allow you to be up to date, always moving forward, getting on that modern platform where you don't have to worry about so much of the stuff. And then looking forward, what else can we do to grow the business and tie it into Office 365 and some of these other platforms that you could really start leveraging the new technologies, AI, and all of those things that we read about and hear about on the news and we see every night that we're like, wow, that'd be cool. Someday maybe we can get there, or you're not that far from it today. So with that, I'd like to thank everyone for joining. Diana's got our information here. If you got questions, reach out. We're more than happy to jump on a call anytime and help you guys through things. And really appreciate you joining our session today.
Thank you.